Whenever we have a mass shooting event, there's a race to find the facts, seemingly not to understand exactly what happened, not to find the objective truth, but to use whatever pieces of the fact pattern we can in the ongoing narrative wars. It's a race to identify how we can use the facts of this particular case to bolster our pre-existing worldviews, how we can assign association with the perpetrator to our political enemies, how we can use this story for political gain generally. I'm not trying to jab at anyone uniquely here. I see both sides doing it with this story and with previous ones like it. But as the narrative war progresses, inevitably certain talking points emerge, and they become trendy. And they get repeated over and over again. And this time around, it's this headline. The Florida school shooting was the 18th school shooting of the year, and it's only February. 18 school shootings in 45 days. Florida massacre is one of many tragedies in 2018. We're averaging one school shooting every 60 hours in 2018. Wednesday's shooting at a Florida high school is the 18th school shooting of the year. These national headlines appearing locally too. The Miami Herald says deadly Florida high school shooting is the 18th in the U.S. this year. And TV News is also repeating that same talking point.
Those 18 school shootings so far this year, shocking.
This is the 18th school shooting this year alone.
This is the 18th school shooting just in 2018.
Florida's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School is the 18th school shooting already in 2018.
And you'll notice sometimes they even change the phrasing a little bit.
This is the 18th time a gun was fired on school grounds this year.
Well, wait, the 18th school shooting or the 18th time a gun was fired on school grounds? Because to me, those sound like different things. If you're like me, that inconsistency and the large number being reported get your eyebrow raising. And just think about it. We're hearing 18 school shootings for the year so far, and we're only 6 weeks into the year, which means we're supposedly having 3 school shootings a week every week for the entire year so far. If that were the case, wouldn't we be seeing wall-to-wall school shooting coverage on the news? Why aren't we hearing about these incidents? To understand the claim, we have to understand the origin. If all these media outlets are repeating this same line, presumably they're all getting information from the same source. In this case, that source is Everytown USA, a gun control advocacy group actively working for community organizing and legislative goals like stopping the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act and proposed reduced regulation on suppressors. And Everytown's research page is the source of this specific claim of 18 school shootings so far in the year 2018. Now, just because this research comes from an advocacy group doesn't necessarily mean the research is wrong, but it does mean we should understand the purpose for which the research was compiled. It wasn't compiled for objective truth-seeking, it was compiled pursuant to an agenda. With that understanding, we should still evaluate the message independently, even if we have reason to be skeptical of the messenger. And I can thank Everytown at least for making it easy for us to do that. They have each individual case of an alleged school shooting itemized with source material for us to evaluate ourselves. And when we do that, it starts to become more clear why we didn't see the news coverage we would expect if in fact we were experiencing 3 school shootings a week this year. 2 of these cases are actually suicides, one being a teenager in Arizona at an elementary school, another being a military veteran reportedly suffering from PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and that case actually occurred at a former school grounds, not in fact a currently operating school. 3 more of these cases were accidental discharges. One occurred in a classroom setting in Texas during a demonstration before a criminal justice club where a student confused a training weapon for a live weapon, shooting at a wall, but nobody was hurt. In Minnesota, a school officer was sitting on a park bench when a 3rd grader pulled the trigger of his holstered weapon. Nobody was hurt in that case either. In Los Angeles, a 12-year-old girl brought a gun to school in a backpack, reportedly not knowing it was loaded. When the backpack fell, the firearm accidentally discharged and struck students. There were 5 reported injuries in that case, including 1 child in critical condition. And while that incident is foolish and certainly raises questions about where the responsible adults are in this girl's life, I don't think it's fair to characterize that event as the same thing as Nicholas Cruz's intentional shooting rampage in Florida. That's not to say there aren't similar cases included in this research. We have several cases of arguments escalating to targeted gun violence at schools. And we have one major case in Kentucky of an indiscriminate mass shooting, more characteristic of what we'd expect when we hear the term school shooting. In that case, 2 were killed and 15 were wounded. By my review, Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida is the 8th, not the 18th, but the 8th case of a firearm discharge on school grounds with a clear intent to harm other people in 2018. I excluded suicides because those cases had neither intent nor effect to harm another person. I also excluded accidental discharges for the same reason. There was no intent in those cases to harm another person, though in that one particular case there was that effect. I also excluded cases of stray bullets where nobody was harmed, one, because it's not clear in those cases that those rounds were discharged with harmful intent, and 2, because it's also not clear that those rounds were discharged from school grounds at all. The 7 incidents prior to Parkland of shots fired on school grounds with intent to harm caused 4 deaths and 18 injuries. The collective damage of all of these incidents combined is less than the tally of 17 dead and 20 plus wounded in Parkland alone. Now, does this mean that since those previous events were lesser in carnage, that they aren't concerning? Does this mean that 8 school shootings rather than 18 is acceptable and no longer something to worry about? Does this mean that any number of school shootings other than 0 is a good number? Of course not, and that's not the message I intend to convey. What's concerning about the flimsiness of this repeated media talking point is not just the fact that they're wrong numerically, it's why they're wrong. It's the fact that apparently we have a media that looks at activist research that's produced not for the purpose of finding the objective truth, but for the purpose of pursuing a social and legislative agenda. We have a media that looks at that and says, yeah, that's good enough. Let's run with that. Let's publish that uncritically. Now, that occurs either because these media figures are too lazy or incompetent to do the same sort of basic Google checking that a guy in a makeshift home studio space can do with a couple hours time, or because they are actually on board with the activist agenda itself. But neither of those explanations are good for the purpose of informing a productive public discourse on this issue. Our ability to address this ongoing social problem depends upon the supply of unbiased information produced only for the purpose of finding the truth and letting the people decide what to do with that truth. If that was the purpose of our media, if that was the mission by which they operated, they would apply at least some scrutiny when confronted with activist research. If you encounter activist research and you pass it along uncritically, does that make you a truth seeker? Does it make you a truth teller? Or does it make you just another activist? Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it.